Thank you for coming. Please feel very free to tweet. If you Google Taxon Bikes SlideShare, you can also find these slides online. So phylogenetic inferences vary over time. I think this is something that we all understand. These are two recently published higher level bird phylogenies, and it's sort of like the more you look, the more you wonder how much you actually understand about the similarity and differences, and maybe also about how to label the nodes and the tips, and that's really what this talk is about. So some premises: when we use the term tree of life, often enough we characterize a goal rather than a state that we've already reached for many groups. And so it might be useful to have something like a phylogenetic knowledge advancement service, and that service would satisfy queries such as the following. Does this particular sequence of inferences have a stabilizing or destabilizing trend? Are two or more phylogenies where each is differentially subsampled at lower levels in congruence, or are they in conflict? And how can an evolutionary study tied to one, maybe earlier phylogeny, be quote-unquote updated, integrated with another later one? Okay, so then the services that you would derive from these kinds of questions is maybe prioritizing research agendas, understanding whether sampling significantly affects the issue of congruence or conflict, and maybe something like the ability to control for the quote-unquote phylogenetic variable that we generate over time on particular evolutionary conclusions. So I'm interested in understanding better how to build such a service. The sort of overarching questions which I'll return to are here, and got to make some stipulations now to move forward. First of all, I'm going to stipulate that this service needs more granular identifiers than quote-unquote just linear names to account for study-specific phylogenetic subtree concepts. With those kinds of identifiers in place, we then need identifier to identifier relationship that match the query semantics that we're interested in by representing congruence, conflict, and achieving reconciliation across concepts associated with multiple inferences. It would be neat if that kind of service would still sort of be cognitively accessible to us, because then we can exercise quality control. At the same time, compatibility with logic gives us scalability and through reasoning and derived products. So, the solution that I'm going to talk to you about, our proposed solution, is a software project called EulerX. And this is essentially a logic constraint solver. So it is a logic program that you supply with certain constraints. It then logically reconciles them and gives you all of the possible world scenarios that are congruent or compatible with those constraints. And it just so happens that in the case of Euler, the input constraints are multiple trees and articulations that span across them, and then the output are something that we call alignments. Okay? This tool works over a set of very basic articulations called region connection calculus. So the idea is you have two regions. They can be either congruent, or one can include the other, or vice versa. They can overlap, creating sort of like three output regions that are actually not identical to any of the input regions, or they can be disjoint. Right? And so these very simple semantics very directly match this idea: can we join two regions or not? Right? That's the link to integration. It just so happens that the proof is in the pudding. Phylogenies have multiple RCC5 alignable components. You could align children, you could align parents, you could align node-associated traits, or even individual specimens. Okay? So what I'm going to show you now is a sequence of use cases, primates, subset of primates, and then back to the alien phylogeny, where I'm sort of really trying to hit the ground with these kinds of semantics, and I'm progressing from classifications to classifications versus phylogenies to phylogenies versus phylogenies, and in the process addressing the issue of sampling and modulating some logic constraints to produce these alignments. So first use case is the two primate classifications, mammal species of the world, 2 versus 3 standards that have been widely used in homology. And this is how Euler looks at the world of human taxonomy making, right? So you have a 2005 classification right here with some parent-child relationships. These are ISA relationships. And then you have a 1993 classification. You see that there are some redundant labels being used. And you have a set of user-asserted RCC5 articulations that express congruence or not. These set of constraints is what Euler takes in, puts it into the logic meat grinder, or vegetable grinder, I guess, and finds out how to align them logically. And this alignment, which looks very similar, is nevertheless different because now you have gray regions, and these gray regions, which you'll see a lot, mean taxonomic congruence. Kind of almost like independent of the labels being used. Green regions are unique to the younger classification. Yellow regions are unique to the older classification. So you can derive some services from this. You can find that there are situations where you have a single name in a congruent region, or many names, synonymy in the language of nomenclature, and a congruent region. And in some cases you have one name that denotes multiple non-congruent regions, and you have also situations like that. And finally, you have some new regions. These are Madagascan lemurs that were discovered in the late 1990s, not known morphotypes at the time of 1993. What's interesting here is that Euler applies the coverage constraint, which means that the relationship between these two parent concepts are driven by the signal that is propagated from their respective children. And this makes sense when there's really the intention of relatively or complete sampling of the children. Okay. Services. If you have a situation like this, you can now sort of like go back to the Linnaean names and assess to what extent they present name, meaning cardinality relationships that are actually straightforward. And you'll find out that there are several situations where we have identifiers that really denote the same region or vice versa that would not be considered good identifiers of taxonomic content. Right? And so to summarize this little mini chapter, the later classification destabilizes the earlier one, and the non-congruence that you observe, which is significant, is not only caused by low-level sampling. And this alignment, I like to think of it as a taxonomic meaning integration map that really allows you to navigate data across the two. You can do statistics on this. This is now all primates, and I can't go into the details, but one of the things that happened in those 12 years is that we have decided to accept many more species-level concepts, and in the process have created situations where taxonomic congruence and different names have propagated such that in that 12-year span, only about 1 in 3 names is sort of like a good meaning identifier. Right? This is not good news for sort of biodiversity informatics. And because this is a reasoning tool, it exposes implicit information. This is a matrix that has each of these classifications, 1993 and 2005, and provides the Euler inferred articulation in this set of mirror, so you can query the space of about 150,000 statements for merging or not each of the concept pairs, where all of the sample stuff is what the reasoner inferred. Okay. Moving on, I gotta speed up a little bit. A classification of lorises, more work monkeys with the phylogeny. The phylogeny here is from OpenTree by Springer and al. This is how you translate it into Euler. There are a couple of Python scripts on GitHub which are really helpful to do so. This is the corresponding classification. The alignment looks like this. You see a bunch of species-level congruence, but you also see a lot of incongruence, which is really of two flavors. All of the green nodes here could really be considered congruent refinements that the phylogeny provides over the taxonomy. So that's sort of like knowledge gain that does not generate conflict. But we also have several classificatory recognized species concepts that are not sampled in the phylogeny, and just by virtue of having this differential sampling at the low level, we get a lot of high-level incongruence, because we apply the coverage constraint, right? And so the idea here is that this differential low-level sampling plus the coverage constraint causes incongruence at higher levels, which really seems sort of like unintuitive. How to deal with that? Now, when you look at the two bird phylogenies, these are sort of like deliberately undersampled, right? They're NGS studies, and if you look, here they are again, even though they represent all of the orders, it's actually a situation of 198 versus 48 terminals, where only 12 of the terminals, this is a subset now just for the parrots, we realized that there are no two parrot species concepts that have been sort of congruently sampled, and as a result, the alignment will basically be, you can't integrate parrots according to Jarvis et al. With parrots according to Primate et al. Right? That doesn't seem intuitive. So what you can do at that point is you can locally relax coverage. Okay, so this is a different input virtualization where we have asserted that Nestor, which is here, and this Tacity, which are here, are allowed to be congruent even if their respective children do not necessarily propagate that message, mostly or only due to differential subsampling. And so if you locally relax this logic constraint, you can then assert higher level equivalences. This is sort of a counterfactual situation. Had the other authors done this, then maybe this would have been congruent. I'm still okay, I think. So then you can express higher level congruence among these two differentially sampled phylogenies, even though at the lower level there are significant differences in density of sampling. Scale this up to all of the birds, you realize that at the ordinal level there's a lot of supra-ordinal congruence. There's also a couple of situations here in the Paleognathans and the Pelecanimarchs where there's incongruence, and this huge part right here is really the issue with these two phylogenies. If you blow it up, you realize that there's much overlap between phylogenetic backbones that can no longer be accounted for by differential subsampling, but is something that you could call true disagreement. And we have now logified that disagreement. In conclusion, and I will rattle through here, if you want to build such a service, talk about human theories more so than things out there in the world that we're about to discover. Model concepts, use concept relationships to really carry much of the semantics of your queries. Excel at representing and explaining conflict. Aim for alignment, not synthesis. And if possible, and I think it's essential, model speaker intentions. I don't know of any service that we have that does that, because our intentions towards our trees are not homogeneous throughout all the parts of the trees. And if you don't do that, you get logic representation ambiguities. Okay. I will thank my collaborators, funding sources. If you need to read one paper about this, use this one. It just came out in the new issue of SysBio, first paper in that volume. And if you're interested in this, please talk to me. I'll also be at the various IEO Bio meetings today and tomorrow and Wednesday. Thank you.